Are we waiting for, we're still waiting for Richard, I think, and a few other people to join. But thank you very much, everybody who's on the line. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Abigail, I'm here.
Great, good. I think we're waiting for Phyllis and Rajinder, but I think they'll be here any minute now.
I'm here already, Abigail.
Sorry about that. And Phyllis, are you here?
I was locked out of speaking. I was waving to you, but I couldn't get through, but it got fixed.
You got there.
I'm here.
All right. Then I think we're ready to go. So welcome everybody. My name's Abigail Jones. I'm the Communications Director at IFPMA. Thanks for joining us today. It's going to be a short 30-minute media briefing to provide you a readout on the Chatham House hosted event, which was held yesterday and today on global COVID-19 vaccine supply chain manufacturing, co-sponsored by COVAX partners and led by the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI, the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, BIO, the Developing Countries Vaccine Manufacturers Network, DCVMN, and the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, IFPMA. We'll have some brief interventions from Richard Hatchett, CEO of CEPI, and Thomas Cooney, DG of IFPMA. And then we'll open up for questions, which I'll ask you to put into the chat. And if you could be kind enough to indicate your name and media outlet, that will be great. For the Q&A, we'll have other people who've been closely involved with the summit and the discussion paper joining us. And I will give a roll call of those people joining us when we get to the questions. Before giving the floor to Richard and to Thomas, I'm just going to ask Emma Ross, Senior Research Fellow of Global Health Program at Chatham House, to say a couple of words as the host of the summit. Emma.
Thank you, Abigail, and welcome everybody to the Centre for Universal Health at Chatham House, where we specialise in issues related to the political economy of health and health reforms, bringing together technical experts with policymakers to candidly discuss some of the key challenges in global health and find ways forward is a cornerstone of our work. And right now, vaccinating the world's population against COVID is, of course, one of the most pressing challenges of the pandemic. As you know, there's been tremendous collaboration to develop vaccines, but now the issue is how to produce an unprecedented 11 billion doses. And there's real danger that the supply bottlenecks could inhibit progress towards that goal. So when we were approached to organize this meeting urgently, we were really delighted to convene it, bringing together more than 100 of the biggest players in this field. It's been a very constructive 2 days, but I'll now hand back over to Abigail to take you through the rest of this.
I'm unmuting. Thank you so much. So, so just as you're thinking about putting forward your questions, if you want to address them to somebody and specifically, in particular, of course, there's Thomas Cooney and Richard Hatchett that you can address them to. Also, together with us is Phyllis Arthur, Vice President, Infectious Diseases and Diagnostics Policy for BIO, Syed Prasad, President of DCVMN, and Rajinder Suri, the Chief Executive of DCVMN. And on top of that, we also have Rasmus Beck-Hansen, the CEO and founder of Affinity, who contributed data to the discussion paper. So just so you know, the lineup that you've got to put your questions to. And so now it's over to Richard and then followed by Thomas.
Great, thank you. Abigail, can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Thank you all. So we have just completed a 2-day discussion under the Chatham House rules. So we are not going to name names, but we are going to talk about the topic of the meeting. This meeting was assembled very rapidly because the organizations that are represented here today, we're hearing from their members about increasing stress within the supply chains of their vaccine manufacturing processes. CEPI, as part of COVAX, also was hearing similar signals, and we have a somewhat privileged position in that because we've invested in a large number of manufacturers, we talk to a large number of manufacturers. We also have a privileged position in terms of talking to countries. We certainly are monitoring the actions of governments in terms of their actions that they take to secure a vaccine for their own populations. And as part of COVAX, we are also seeking to secure vaccine for the countries that are participants in COVAX, which at this point is 190 countries. And what we at CEPI, and Thomas can speak to this from his own perspective in just a moment, what we at CEPI have seen over recent weeks and months is increasing signs of strain within supply chains, companies beginning to report spot shortages of critical materials, raw materials, critical consumables, even equipment that is necessary for vaccine manufacturing. One of the pieces of information that was shared and much discussed in the meeting over the last 3 days is the scale of the manufacturing ramp up that we are experiencing. We estimate that the companies have self-reported those with vaccines that are in late stages of development and anticipated production somewhere in the range of 10 to 14 billion doses of vaccine for COVID-19 in the coming year. At least that is the ambition. I think it's important to understand that that maps to somewhere between 3.5 and 5.5 billion doses of global vaccine production in its entirety for all other vaccines combined. So we are talking about a massive ramp up of vaccine supply. That is extraordinary. I think it speaks to the global solidarity of the effort to rise and meet the challenge of COVID-19. But you can imagine that a production system that is scaled to the vaccine numbers that I quoted earlier would find it challenging to scale up to those levels. We also, the upstream suppliers who provide those critical raw materials and consumables are having to scale their efforts to meet the needs of the producers. And what we are beginning to see, and this is obviously part of the public record, is stuttering supply, leading some countries to consider or take actions such as imposing export controls or rating items, as the U.S. has done under the Defense Production Act. And those compensatory mechanisms in the context of a setting where there were already some strains on the supply system for the production create potentially real problems, and not only problems for the production of COVID-19 vaccines, but potentially problems for the production of other critical medical products. Fortunately, that hasn't unfolded yet, but that's why we decided to have the supply chain summit, because all stakeholders have an interest in the system operating at peak productivity. And we wanted to bring the stakeholders together in a space where they could freely converse with each other and share ideas so that we could try to address this problem as quickly as possible, head off any challenges. I'll just say in summary, and then I'll turn it over to Thomas to make remarks, that the meeting was really remarkably productive. We had extraordinary attendance. We also had people stay for the entirety of the meeting. We had very few people sort of come in and drop out. A very vigorous discussion around the key solutions, agreement that there was a cause for concern. There was a recognition of the fragility of the current supply chains and a desire to find ways to prevent that from happening. I would say there were three big themes that we talked about in the meeting. One was building capacity for the future and making sure that capacity was sustainable. The second was the need for better information exchange, better visibility across the system. And the third was the need for collaborative frameworks to facilitate the system continuing to operate at peak productivity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. And I think I can, from my side, from IFPMA, but also on behalf of my colleagues from developing country vaccine manufacture networks and bio, say that we were extremely pleased that this meeting, which was organized at very short notice because it expresses the urgency, was so productive and so successful. I think one of the elements, and you said it, is that few people fully understand the scale of the task. This is the largest ramping up of manufacturing the world has ever seen. It's also the most ambitious immunization program ever seen, with this tripling of capacity. And I think it's quite amazing where we got, but there's no surprise that we have seen bumps. Many of you in the media were writing over the last few weeks about the impatience, and we have seen the move from anxiety about vaccine hesitancy to anger about why aren't we vaccinated yet. Now, I think on the very positive side, what has come out of the meeting is everybody really is fully committed to doing more and doing better. I think we all committed to expanding capacity, and I have to admit myself, if you would have asked me 3 months ago, I would have said there is no idle capacity, there are no idle workforces, everybody's already doing the maximum of what they can. And just over the last few weeks, we have seen new players, experienced players in pharmaceutical manufacturing coming in. We have also seen an amazing amount of collaboration and togetherness, for example, between innovative manufacturers and developing country manufacturers. We are all partners of COVAX. That's we have a shared interest, and we know that no one is safe until everyone is safe. Therefore, I think the first commitment, and somebody said, leave no stone unturned, because really, I'm convinced today that we will see more increase of capacity, we will see more partnership, because we all know that this is what we need to do. But in order for this to happen, we already saw, I think, a large consensus among participants in terms of the importance of the free flow, not just of goods, but also of workforce, because one of the bottlenecks is skilled workers. And therefore, when you look at the global supply chains, when you look at the importance of quality controlled manufacturing, GMP, it is important that you can also move workforce. I think we also have seen a commitment to continue with the technology transfer, which we have already seen. But we also, I think, among participants, some, not all of them, were deep into the complexities of manufacturing. We have seen a better understanding of what's needed to make technology transfer work. I think one of the calls for, and one of our colleagues on here is really the expert in terms of what do we all, Rasmus Bech-Hansen from Affinity, it is a call for more information, better demand forecasting, and inventory management. We had some really intriguing discussions also on the need, to maybe some voluntary actions together with the international organizations, but among the private sector, of course, always fully cognizant of antitrust rules and compliance. But there was also somebody who called out for the need to get support, to get buy-in at the highest political level, because COVID-19 is really a global pandemic which hits everybody. Last but not least, I'd just like to mention the importance of the regulatory harmonization. I think we all extremely grateful for the incredible work regulators, be it WHO, be it FDA, MHRA, EMA, or others have done. We had also people from the regulatory field there, and it is amazing how fast we saw safe and effective vaccines approved. But now we already are concerned about how to deal with the variants. I must say, Richard will certainly allow me to make a commercial for his CEPI 2.0 launch. When you look at the CEPI 2.0 launch tomorrow, it's not about COVID-19, it's about how to be better prepared for the next pandemic preparedness. And with this, I'll hand back to Abigail, and happy with others to respond to questions.
So first of all, thank you very much, Richard and Thomas, for those remarks and explaining to us what went on. And just for the journalists to show you how we're working real time, we've just uploaded in the chat the press release and the landscape discussion paper, which was circulated to the participants at the meeting, providing a great deal of explanation that tries to elucidate on this whole supply chain challenge that Thomas and Richard made reference to. So starting from the top, we have a question here that I'm going to possibly ask Richard to take a first stab at and others to step in. It's from Sumaya Keynes from The Economist. And the question is, are there already examples of export restrictions disrupting trade in vaccine inputs? Or could you describe the kinds of problems you're worried about vaccine export restrictions creating? Richard?
Sure, no, thank you. So one of the points that was shared at the meeting was how one of the vaccine products or one of the manufacturers' vaccine products contained over 200 different components that were derived from more than a dozen countries. I'll leave it somewhat vague, but that speaks to the interdependency of all vaccine manufacturers for critical inputs and materials, and this is everything from filters to resins, tubing, disposable bags, for the disposable technologies for fermentation. All of these components have to be in place, obviously, to proceed with vaccine manufacturing. And if any critical item falls short and you don't have a available replacement, then it can disrupt the entire process. I have been paying a lot of attention to the Defense Production Act in the United States, which rates specific items and basically reserves those items for use in facilities to provide for American manufacturing, which we can understand why the U.S. would do that to protect their own population. But if those items become in short supply for manufacturers that are outside of the United States and cannot be replaced, then that would disrupt vaccine manufacturing at facilities outside the United States. We have not seen any, to my knowledge, any manufacturing stop because of the shortages, but we are aware that those rating of specific items is leading to short supply of critical items for ex-US manufacturers. So it is a real problem, and that's one example. Certainly the imposition of export controls on manufacturing products or critical material could be put in place by any country that has the manufacturing for those items within its boundaries. And you could end up seeing back and forth exchanges between countries. And we have certainly in recent weeks in Europe, between Europe and the UK, for example, have seen at least, rumblings that could happen. So what we were trying to do with this meeting was, getting stakeholders together to understand the complexity of the challenges that our manufacturers face. And there was I would say, a very broadly shared theme among the speakers about the criticality of the free flow of goods across international borders to allow the manufacturing to continue. So yes, it is a real issue. It's not theoretical, and it is widely felt. Over.
Thank you very much, Richard. Does anybody want to add to that? Well, we've got plenty of questions coming in and not much time, so don't feel obliged to, but if anybody was chomping at the bit. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question, which I think maybe Sai Prasad, you would like to respond to. It's from the NPR, the US National Public Radio. And the question is, in this global crisis, many companies still appear to be holding on to their IP rights very tightly. How do you convince the companies that have won approval for their vaccines to license their IP much more broadly to other manufacturers?
Thank you for that question. I think this is something that is of discussion, within the industry. So what we are urging as the Developing Country Vaccine Manufacturers Network and with our partners in Gavi and CEPI and the WHO and IFPMA is for innovators and manufacturers to get together in terms of partnerships, in terms of technology transfer, in terms of sharing of knowledge and expertise, so that manufacturing can happen not just in certain countries where the products are innovated, but it can actually happen in low-income countries or even middle-income countries, closer to the populations that need these vaccines. So I think the discussion is about knowledge, expertise, technology transfer, because these are complicated issues, very similar to what Richard mentioned earlier. Uh, some of these vaccines take multiple types of expertise and knowledge and know-how and IP to be manufactured. It's not a single monolithic IP that can just manufacture these products. So I think we are taking a holistic view, but we're also looking at high-risk funding. We're also looking at regulatory affairs that are complicated in vaccines. We're also looking at trade barriers that are imposing restrictions. So I think we're looking at all of these concepts to enable large-scale vaccine manufacturing, especially in low-income countries and middle-income countries. Over.
Thank you very much. And since we're on the topic of IP, I'll continue on the winning streak. The Financial Times asks, the briefing papers make no mention of intellectual property specifically. Given all talk of IP as one of the main barriers to expand access, what's the participants' take on this? Companies keep saying this isn't this time isn't like any other. Could it be time to do something radical and think about IP and very broad tech transfer? So maybe, Thomas, would you like to take this? And then maybe Richard, you want to follow up on it?
Yeah, I'll happily make a start and have Richard and go, but I can basically only echo what Sai Prasad already said. There is tech transfer happening right now, but the tech transfer is not just, this is less about IP, it's about knowledge transfer, it's know-how transfer, it's joint training, and it's also checking out the recipient of the tech transfer, where you need to have the trust and competence. It's quite interesting when you look at IP is not in the paper. It's not that, for example, we push back on IP not being in the paper, but everybody who knows about vaccine manufacturing and was addressing the bottlenecks knew that IP is not the issue. The bottlenecks are the capacity, the scarcity of raw materials, scarcity of ingredients, and it is about the know-how. For example, something which is rarely noticed, there are examples of compulsory licenses in particular with small molecules, and that led to manufacturing of small molecules on the CL. There are not examples of that in the vaccines field, simply because, as Sai Prasad already explained, this is so complex, so sophisticated, and therefore there's a bit of a disconnect between the people who talk about how can we ramp up manufacturing, how can we achieve this common goal on the one hand, and the political discussions on IP on the other.
Anybody want to follow up on that?
I'll just add, Abigail, that this meeting, I think Thomas talked to the IP issues pretty clearly. But this meeting was really focused on looking at supply chains and looking at the ways in which the actions of individual actors within the manufacturing sector who were trying to manufacture their products, trying to secure the materials they need to manufacture those products at this remarkable elevation of effort. And you have to remember this is also happening simultaneously. It's not just one individual manufacturer trying to scale up their manufacturing, but multiple manufacturers at the same time, all scaling up simultaneously, all needing, many of them needing common materials to do that. And the challenges that they face and the challenges that the upstream suppliers face in terms of creating those critical materials, and the challenges that governments who are trying to meet the needs of their populations face. All of those individual actors are taking steps trying to proceed rationally, but potentially leading into a very complicated situation. And it was sorting out that problem and trying to create awareness among the different stakeholders about how we can successfully navigate these bottlenecks that Thomas referred to successfully, rather than a conversation that was principally around intellectual property and whether or not that would contribute to increasing vaccine capacity, because that's not the acute problem, as Thomas said.
Abigail, maybe I can add on here. These vaccines being the biological products, unlike pharmaceuticals, which are chemistry-based products, the complexities are still of higher challenge, because you have a drug substance, you have a drug product, and then you have the final fill and finish. So at the drug substance level itself, there are several complexities which are involved, whether it is in terms of platform technology, whether it is in the form of capacity, whether it is in the form of yields. So there are so many issues which one has to really understand before getting into the tech transfer. And then matching the scaling up facility, whether in terms of fill finish or the final product. Again, this has to be, a challenge which has to be fully understood before getting into this kind of a tech transfer agreements with other companies or other countries. So ability of a individual company to absorb technology and have a trained manpower to really understand what are the complexities and how to take it forward are also going to be the key challenges. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. Thank you very much. We'll now take a question from Stat, and maybe it's an opportunity for Rasmus to sort of talk about a little bit about the figures. So Rasmus, you're just flagging up to you, and then potentially then we can build on some other comments that were made at the summit, and I'll let somebody decide to raise their hand if they want to build on from that. So the question is, was it the view of the participants of the meeting that COVID vaccine production can be scaled up to 10, 14 billion without eroding the capacity to produce other vaccines? Have there been instances yet where non-COVID vaccine production has negatively impacted by COVID production demands? So maybe the scaling up question in terms of the figures, Rasmus, you can get us started, and then I'll take hands up from somebody else to take it on from there.
Yeah, thank you for that, Abigail. I think everyone at the summit has been really surprised of the actual scale up we've seen. We had at the beginning or the end of last year, the world has produced around 31 million vaccines. And at that point, the world thought that they would get around 800 million. So there was a huge mismatch between what was projected and that was actually delivered. And of course, that created a large amount of problems with vaccination rollout throughout the world. But what we are now seeing is a very different picture here already in March. The world has produced more than 400 million vaccines. We are seeing an exponential scale up month on month. And I think everyone at the summit recognize that it would be possible to, if everything goes right, it will be possible to reach a kind, maybe not 11 billion, more around kind of 9 to 10 billion. So there will still be a kind of a shortage at the end of the year, but we are seeing a completely unprecedented ramp up. And I think one of the other interesting takeaways from the discussions was also that if you look at the global picture of this, there's a lot coming out of China. China is right now actually the largest producer of vaccines, but US is ramping up very quickly, and the same is Europe and India. So we are seeing an interesting global pattern also emerging. And then to the second part, I will let one of the others address that.
So the second part of the question was, have there been instances yet where non-COVID vaccine production has been negatively impacted by COVID demands? Thomas,
Abigail, I can jump in, but, and others can correct me if I'm misstating. There were no specific instances that were cited, but concerns were expressed that this, was potentially a real problem, and it, companies talked about when they face spot shortages in other circumstances, not in this instance, but they have to make trade-off decisions and have protocols for making trade-off decisions if they're ever forced to do that. I think the reason that the meeting was so well attended and that we had the rapt attention of the participants for the entirety of the meeting, and it was put together, I should say, very, very quickly. The invitees had, a week or 10 days notice at most, and yet we had, very significant participation from all of the stakeholders. And I think the reason they came was because of the concerns that we've been articulating, and they do perceive the real risk that this shortages could have spillover effects into other medical product areas.
Thank you. We have two questions from Politico, which in a sense sort of kind of are around the summit. So maybe Thomas, you want to get it started, and others might want to follow on. So the question is, so what's next after the summit? Should we expect any more partnerships like J&J and Merck announced? And then the follow-on question from another colleague at Politico is, the WHO described the meeting as almost a matchmaking summit. Were any new matches made between potential new manufacturers and vaccine developers? And if so, how long it will take before the necessary tech transfer to take place for production to begin? So I think quite a number of you might be, will be able to follow on from each other in responding to that. So what's next after this summit?
I mean, clearly, I think everybody who was at the summit is keen to follow up. This summit was not a dating meeting, no blind dates or things like that, because just in terms of flagging it, we had high-level antitrust lawyers with us who would have immediately intervened if the summit would have been a matchmaking, in particular since this was done on a virtual Zoom event. But I do expect, as I said, we will see more partnerships, we will see more surprising announcements about new capacities found, but also I think we will see not just the short-term, but the longer-term dialogue on how to improve on tech transfer. I think there's a commonality of views. I've already had discussions with several manufacturers from our side afterwards, and there's a willingness to engage in that. In terms of the tech transfer, as we already heard, it's already happening now, and the expansion of capacity has taken place because you have partnerships, for example, between innovative manufacturers and developing country manufacturers, both bringing their respective competencies to the fore. But we also had, of course, a number of high-level government representatives there who I think also understood that they can help to address inefficiencies. I see Phyllis is keen to jump in.
So Actually, agree, Thomas. I think the other thing we saw, and we will hopefully see in the future, is suppliers and manufacturers working closely together to find efficiencies in the manufacturing processes themselves. Many companies have already been working on that, but I think it was a very common theme that there are some mechanisms in the short and midterm that can allow companies to work to make themselves even better at the use of supplies and at manufacturing. So there was a lot of conversations about things that could increase supply in the short term that I think are very important and will hopefully allow for us to see some efficiencies soon. I think the other thing you'll see is a call for investment in the entire ecosystem across not just the manufacturing scale up, but the investments in those suppliers themselves, having more of them, having more redundancies globally, and having more opportunities to work with regulators to have different suppliers match different manufacturers' needs. This will allow companies to be a little more flexible and nimble moving forward.
Thank you very much. Next couple of questions, and then we will actually be wrapping up. So Associated Press is asking, in terms of skilled workers, what are the specific proposals put forward to address immediate needs? What kinds of skills are lacking and where? Does Saeed, do you want to take that one?
I think in terms of skills, I think it's a constant, look out for new skills and expertise, not just within our own organizations, but I think pretty much across the globe. There were discussions in the summit where certain companies were talking about hiring in the hundreds of people during the last several months and also continue to do so during 2021. What this means is we do have existing human resources in our respective companies and organizations, but they're already doing or developing or manufacturing the kind of vaccines that we are supposed to manufacture and supply globally. So for COVID vaccines specifically, either we have an existing team that's able to do that, or we need to recruit new personnel so that they can manufacture the kind of vaccines that we need. So I think it's a constant race to have more expertise, and we can never have enough. And I think many companies are in the process of recruiting and developing more human resources. Over.
Thank you.
And I'll just add, this is a part of the overall issue of the bioeconomy worldwide. These are highly skilled activities, and I think all of us are trying to find new ways to invest in workforce development that can keep up with the fantastic nature of biotechnology. But it requires really that we think about workforce development as something extremely important we all have to do. And this is no better exemplified by what's happening in COVID-19 expansion.
Rajinder?
Yes, to add to what Mr. Sai Prasad and Phyllis just said, basically these are, as I was referring earlier, being biological operations. So you have at drug substance level itself, you have upstream, you have downstream, and then you have formulation and then filling. Everything requires different expertise. And then more important is the quality control. There almost 70% of the time is required for quality control. So you require a totally different skill set. And then you have quality assurance for release of the batches. So at every step of the manufacturing, you require a different set of people and different set of qualifications, training, expertise. And that is what is becoming complex, because this is a scarce commodity and this is what is required to be expanded. And therefore, large training programs would need to be done to ensure that you have sufficient supply of trained manpower. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to wrap up. We have a series of questions which are actually all around a similar challenge, which is about developing manufacturing capacity in developing countries, or specifically in Africa. So I will do a readout, and then we can take it in terms of who wishes to respond to them. So from DevEx, we have a question of, can you please talk about whether there are there has been progress made in increasing COVID-19 vaccine manufacturing on the African continent over the past year? If so, in what ways? And what are the challenges in increasing manufacturing capacity in the African continent? And in a very similar vein, from Health Policy Watch, was there any discussion about how to assist Africa's vaccine manufacturing capacity, given that we are likely to be worst affected by vaccine shortages? And then it links up with Geneva Files, Health Files question, which is, what is the mapped capacity amongst developing country manufacturers as of March 2021? So there's a bunch of questions around ramping up manufacturing in developing countries, more specifically Africa, and also where are we in terms of a data point as far as that's concerned. I don't know whether...
Abigail, since this is fairly sensitive, I may have a go first with a very honest answer. I think we have heard again and again at the summit that basically we have seen and we are seeing amazing ramping up and amazing scaling up of capacity in both industrialized and developing countries. When you look at the huge capacities in India, when you look at the huge capacities in China increasingly, when also you look at the partnerships. But I think the honest answer in terms of the urgency, people want the vaccine now and not the day after tomorrow. I think the experts' response was, you look at where the know-how is, where the expertise is, where you have existing facilities which can be ramped up, and there is no short-term fix, for example, in that respect, in terms of expanding manufacturing capacity in Africa. What you do see is in the fill and finish area, but that's basically the last part. There are some fill and finish capacities also in Africa, but there isn't that much there. When it comes to the future, I think that's a different question, but that's not, no, and there Richard may have a word on it, but also in terms of what's short-term possible, Sai may have, and Rasmus, of course, knows all the numbers.
It looks like, unfortunately, Richard has dropped off. He's dropped back again. That's fine.
I was having a home office adventure with my 9-year-old.
Well, then maybe what I'll suggest, Richard, I'll leave you the closing words, and just ask Sai or Ajinda if you want to build on the points that Thomas has made.
We are in active discussions to look at how to increase, manufacturing expertise and capacities in Africa. That in fact, members of our network are in active discussions. We do have members of our network based in one country of Africa. But the discussion for COVID-19 specifically is, how do you ensure vaccines are available as soon as possible? When we are talking about increasing capacities and expertise, it is a futuristic concept. Maybe we should think about building it in the years to come. But during 2021 and maybe early 22, we need to go to where the existing capacities are, existing expertises, existing human resources are, and how we can expand those capacities to provide more vaccines to mostly low-income countries and middle-income countries. But there is an active discussion going on in our network circles about how we increase capabilities and expertise and manufacturing in Africa. Over.
Thank you very much.
I'm happy to make just a quick comment on that. So what we're currently seeing, as mentioned, is the mismatch between supply and demand, with way too little supply. But I think one concern that was repeatedly mentioned is that there might be a point where you get to oversupply and too little demand. So one of the things that I think many manufacturers are considering is, what are the level of investment that from a longer perspective will make sense. And I think one of the questions for the world is really, what are the ongoing capacity we will need? Will we need like 12 billion vaccine to be able to produce 12 billion vaccines every year for the coming many years or not? And that goes back to also what are the assumptions around the variants, the booster shots needed. And I think those are really important considerations that there are no easy answers to.
So, Richard, if you would like to just give any final takeaway from what you would like people to remember about the summit.
Sure. No, thank you, Abigail. I think the important thing to take away, everyone who was gathered in the summit, everybody who's on stage with me, is concerned with the principal issue of how can the world end the pandemic and how can we do that most efficiently and most rapidly. The participants in the summit and CEPI in particular, and my partners in COVAX who were co sponsors of the summit, are also concerned about how the world can emerge from the global pandemic stronger, more united, and more able to respond to future infectious disease crises. There was a great recognition within the summit that the solutions that we devise to the immediate problems that we face, will lay the foundation potentially for structures that come out of the pandemic and maybe provide the foundation for future preparedness and response. I would just encourage all of you, if you are going to be writing about the summit, do take a close look at the white paper. We received a tremendous amount, and it was uniformly positive in terms of feedback from the participants. It does lay out the problem that we currently face in a nice way. It begins to think about potential solutions. We've got a lot to reflect on as we leave the summit. And our goal ultimately, as I said, is in the pandemic now and make sure that we're better prepared for the future.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you very much, Emma, Phyllis, Thomas, Rajinder, Sai, and Rasmus. Thank you very much indeed. And we'll close it there.
Thank
Good
you.
night. Good night.
Thank
you,
you.
everybody.
Good night.
Thank you for your time
Thank
and
you.
interest. Bye-bye.
All right.